In the year 1814, a young Frenchman wrote to the Royal Society of London to ask a favour. Now that might seem a bit odd. After all, the French under Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte had just done their best to try and destroy the British and basically take over Europe. But we're not talking here about French and English armies. The young Frenchman in question was Jean-François Champollion, a very smart academic, a brilliant linguist, who was writing to his fellow academics and researchers in England for help. Academics are kind to each other, right? Helpful, respectful. Nothing cutthroat about academia, right? Your academic reputation can be made or broken on new discoveries. And if someone else is after the same discovery as you, instant enemies. The secretary of the Royal Society at the time was the English linguist Thomas Young, who happened to be researching the same thing as Champollion: how to decipher ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. The key to deciphering hieroglyphics was the Rosetta Stone. And when Champollion asked the Royal Society for a nice clean transcription of the Rosetta Stone for his research, Thomas Young wrote back, no. But why all the hoopla anyway? Why were these men so eager to decipher hieroglyphics? Why would hieroglyphics even need deciphering? After all, hieroglyphics has been around for millennia. The earliest use of hieroglyphic symbols, the second known writing system in history, stems from around 3100 BCE. The name hieroglyphics is actually Greek. It means the sacred engraving. But the script was invented by ancient Egyptians long before the Greeks were around. Egyptians principally used hieroglyphics in government and religion. So state records and temple texts were all done in hieroglyphics. But just look at it. I mean, it may look simple, but it's incredibly complex, with individual symbols sometimes being pronounced as sounds or phonemes, sometimes as whole words, and sometimes not pronounced at all, but written just to give a grammatical clue to the text. I mean, who can remember all of that? Most people in the ancient world are illiterate anyway, can't read or write. But professionals, like merchants and doctors, they need a good, reliable writing system. So Egyptians created two more scripts, hieratic and demotic. These two scripts were more phonetic. You read a lot of them as sounds, just like we do with the Latin alphabet when we read English. So you've got this formal script, hieroglyphics, and by the second millennium BCE, it's everywhere, commonly used for state and religious affairs, all over the tombs and temples of Egypt. But by the time of Champollion and Thomas Young in the 19th century, nobody could read it. Why? That's a bit of a story. You see, Egypt, the Egypt of the pharaohs, was conquered by the Romans in 30 BCE. So now the government of Egypt is run in Latin, not using hieroglyphics. And in the 4th century, after the Eastern Romans or Byzantines had become Christian under Emperor Constantine, the Christian governors of Egypt largely prohibited the ancient non-Christian religion of the Egyptians. No more temples, no more sun gods, and certainly no more hieroglyphics. And when the Muslims conquered Egypt in the mid-7th century, of course, they had no interest in bringing back hieroglyphics. They already had their own language and script to use in Egypt, Arabic. And yet so much of Egyptian culture and history was written in hieroglyphics, 3,000 years of history. And that's why you had researchers like Champollion and Young competing to break the hieroglyphic code. That would be a huge discovery, wouldn't it? So, centuries after the Muslim conquest, by the time Napoleon Bonaparte leads his French forces in their invasion of Egypt in July 1798, hieroglyphics has been long forgotten. Many people, including researchers, didn't think it was a writing system at all. Maybe just a bunch of magical symbols left over from the time of the pharaohs. Of course, if you're a French soldier, you don't carry the way, do you? You have a job to do. And while clearing away some stones in the town of Rosetta in northern Egypt in July 1799, a French soldier found this, the Rosetta Stone, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever. What makes it so special? Well, look here. You've got 3 sections, right? Each one is written in a different script. Hieroglyphics at the top, Demotic in the middle, and Greek at the bottom. And all 3 sections say more or less the same thing. So, to decipher hieroglyphics, you just have to match the different writing systems, yes? A lot harder than you think. You see, Thomas Young had already counted up all the words in Greek and all the symbols in hieroglyphics. And with that data, he could identify which Egyptian hieroglyphic meant king. So, you've got the hieroglyphic symbol for king, but you don't know how to say it. Why not? Because you don't know what language the ancient Egyptians were speaking. As far as Thomas Young was concerned, Egyptians spoke Arabic. But what did they speak before the Arabs came into Egypt? Well, there was a theory already that the Coptic language of the Christian church in Egypt was a leftover of the old Egyptian language of the pharaohs. After all, the very same Egyptian Christians who banned the old religion did speak the language of the old religion. But Thomas Young couldn't speak Coptic. So there was no way he could test that theory. Guess who could speak Coptic? Yep, Champollion. In the meantime, Young is stuck with counting words, and he followed up on the theory of Zoëga in 1797, that this hieroglyphic symbol, the cartouche, was used by Egyptians to write proper names, like the names of kings and queens, and he was right about that. In fact, he was able to decipher this cartouche by transcribing some symbols as sounds, P, T, M, I, S, close enough, which gives you Ptolemies, or Ptolemy, which is what the Rosetta Stone is actually about, the achievements of Pharaoh Ptolemy V, as recorded in 196 BCE. But there were still symbols that Thomas Young couldn't get. Like this one. This cartouche has some familiar symbols from Thomas Young's work on the name Ptolemy, right? You've got an M sound, you've got 2 S sounds, but he couldn't get the circle. What is it? It's round. It's a wheel, a planet, a disk, eternity. Who knows? In 1822, Champollion took a look at this cartouche and he guessed that that simple shape might have been a symbol for the sun, since the Egyptians worshipped the sun as the creator. And the Coptic word for sun was Ra. That final piece of the puzzle fell into place, and the name within the cartouche was revealed. Ramesses, the name of the greatest king in Egyptian history. The all-important connection had been proven by the Frenchman. The Coptic language was indeed a descendant of the original language of the pharaohs. Champollion's grammatical study of the ancient Egyptian language was not published until after he had died on the 4th of March, 1832. Nonetheless, by the time Howard Carter discovered the tomb of King Tut in November 1922, a century after Champollion had deciphered the cartouche of Ramesses, all of the hieroglyphic texts in Tut's tomb could be read. Because of the discoveries of men like Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion, researchers could now begin in earnest deciphering 3,000 years of Egyptian history.